In a small village where poverty walked freely like an uninvited guest, a boy named Arinze was born. His parents, Obaka and Ogechi, were poor farmers who tailored from sunrise to sunset just to keep food on the table. Their mud house leaked whenever the rain poured, and their clothes were patched over and over until the patches became part of the design. But in that home of scarcity, one thing flourished: love. Obaka and Ogechi cherished their only son and swore to give him the education they never had. It was not easy. Sometimes they had to sell firewood or even skip meals to pay his school fees. Yet, each time Chike returned home with his slate and exercise books, they smiled, believing that one day his education would change their story. Every morning, Arinze walked to school with a stomach that often echoed with emptiness, but his eyes remained bright with determination. While other children had new sandals, he carried his battered slippers in his hand and wore them only when he reached the school compound. To him, education was sacred. He could not afford to wear out the only pair of footwear he had. Arinze was not like other children who often got carried away with play. He was thoughtful, observant, and always asked questions about the world beyond his village. He admired the traders who returned from the city with stories of tall buildings, endless traffic, and opportunities. To Arinze, Lagos was not just a city, it was a dreamland. Every night, after struggling with the dim light of a kerosene lamp, he would whisper to himself, "One day, I will go to Lagos. I will make it, and Mama and Papa will never suffer again." That dream became his fuel, pushing him to endure every hardship with patience. When Arinze finished primary school, his parents could no longer afford secondary education. The decision broke their hearts. They knew the road ahead would be rough, but they had no choice. Obaka sat his son down one evening under the old mango tree and told him about serving a wealthy businessman in Lagos. "It is not school, my son," Obaka said with sorrow in his eyes, "but you will learn trade, and after years of service, you will be settled to start your own." Arinze nodded, swallowing his tears. He was young, but he understood that sacrifices must be made for dreams to come true. The morning of Arinze's departure was filled with mixed emotions. His mother cried silently as she packed his small bag, just two shirts, a pair of trousers, and a pair of worn-out sandals. His father placed his rough hands on Arinze's shoulders and whispered a prayer of blessing. As the bus rumbled out of the village, Arinze pressed his face against the window, watching his home disappear. His heart pounded with fear and hope. The boy who had never gone beyond the neighboring town was now on his way to the great city of Lagos. In Lagos, the noise, the crowd, and the endless movement overwhelmed Arinze. But what struck him most was the mansion of Chief Adewale, the wealthy businessman who dealt in electronics. Chief had many shops across Lagos and apprentices under his care. Arinze was introduced to him, and with a firm handshake, the agreement was sealed. 10 years of faithful service, after which Arinze would be settled with money to start his own business. 10 years sounded like forever, but Arinze smiled. He believed that at the end of that road, a new life awaited him. Arinze's days began before sunrise. He swept the shop floors, arranged the electronics, and followed his boss to the warehouse. At first, the work was overwhelming. His legs ached from standing all day, and his back burned from lifting heavy cartons. But he was determined. Whenever exhaustion weighed him down, he would whisper to himself, 10 years, just 10 years, and I will have my own shop. Slowly, he learned the art of trading, how to bargain, how to attract customers, and how to spot fake products from the genuine ones. Not every day was kind to Arinze. Sometimes his boss shouted at him before customers, accusing him of mistakes he never made. Sometimes senior apprentices bullied him, sending him on errands while they rested. Yet Arinze endured. He told himself that each insult, each struggle was shaping him into the man he needed to become. He observed everything: how money was counted, how suppliers were handled, and how trust was earned. Pain became his teacher, and patience became his shield. Years passed slowly. Arinze grew taller, stronger, and wiser. He became one of the most trusted boys in the business. Customers began to call him the polite boy because of his humble manner and honesty. At night, when others slept, he would close his eyes and imagine himself behind the counter of his own shop. He pictured his parents visiting Lagos to see what their son had become. That picture kept him alive through the long, hard years of service. Finally, the 10th year arrived. Arinze's heart was full of joy. He had counted the years one by one, and now the time for settlement had come. He looked forward to the day Chief Adewale would call him, hand him money, and say, "Go and start your own." His friends among the apprentices congratulated him, and even his parents at home were already thanking God for what was about to happen. Arinze felt like a man, standing on the edge of his breakthrough. But life sometimes has a cruel way of testing dreams. The day Arinze approached Chief Adewale for his settlement, the air felt heavy with expectation. He spoke with humility, reminding Chief Adewale of their agreement. But Chief's expression hardened, his eyes cold. What settlement? Did I not feed you, clothe you, and give you shelter all these years? You should be grateful for that. Or don't you know that times are hard? The city that once held promises now felt like a cage, and the dream he had carried for so long shattered before his very eyes. Arinze wandered the streets of Lagos that night, unable to return to the apprentice quarters. Everywhere he turned, he saw reminders of the years he had wasted. He thought of his parents who had prayed and waited for this day. He thought of the dreams he had carried in his heart. But as he sat by the roadside, his tears drying on his cheeks, he whispered to himself, "I will not give up. If Lagos wants to break me, it will have to try harder." His hands were empty, but his spirit refused to surrender. News of Arinze's betrayal spread among his friends. They were angry on his behalf, for they knew how faithful he had served. Though they were not wealthy, they could not watch him sink. One by one, they contributed what little they had. When the money was gathered, it was not much, but it was enough to buy few items and start something small. As they handed it over to him, they said, "Arinze, we believe in you. Don't let this setback be the end." Their faith in him lit a new fire in his soul. With the little money, Arinze started something very small. He bought a few electronic accessories, just enough to display on a shared table in a friend's shop. The space was tight, but it was better than nothing. At first, customers barely noticed him, but slowly, his politeness, honesty, and persistence began to attract people. He might not have had the biggest shop, but he offered what many big traders lacked: trust. And in Lagos, that was gold. Arinze worked tirelessly. He arrived earlier than everyone and left later than most. He saved every kobo he could, refusing to waste money on frivolities. Whenever he was tempted, he remembered his parents' sacrifices and his wasted 10 years, and he pressed on harder. His friend who shared the shop with him admired his determination. "Arinze," he once said, "you are not just doing business, you are fighting destiny itself." Arinze smiled. It was true. He was fighting, and he had no plans of losing. Years rolled by, and fortune finally began to smile on Arinze. His small table grew into a corner stand, and soon he could afford to buy more goods. Customers began to seek him out specifically, and his savings grew. When a new plaza was built in the heart of Lagos, Arinze saw his chance. For the first time, he was able to rent a shop of his own. Standing inside that freshly painted shop, he whispered, "From the roadside to a plaza, God is faithful." He thought his struggles were finally behind him, but destiny was not done testing him. The day Arinze opened his shop in the plaza was one of the happiest of his life. He arranged every item with care: television sets, radios, phone accessories, and other electronics. For the first time, his name was on the shop signboard, and he felt like a true businessman. Customers streamed in, attracted by his reputation for honesty. Each sale reminded him of how far he had come. In that moment, he believed that every tear, every insult, and every betrayal had been worth it. The boy who once served empty handed now stood as his own master. Weeks turned into months and business boomed. Arinze was able to send money to his parents regularly, repairing their leaking roof and buying them new clothes. He was proud, and they were even more proud. His parents marveled at his progress. Arinze, you are proof that perseverance works, one of them said. But Arinze only smiled and replied, it is not my strength. It is God and the people who never gave up on me. Life finally seemed to be giving him the peace he had long prayed for. But success often attracts challenges. One evening, Arinze noticed sparks flickering from a faulty wire in the ceiling of the plaza. He mentioned it to the plaza manager, but the man waved it off. Don't worry, it's nothing, he said casually. Arinze was uneasy. He had worked too hard to build this business, and the thought of losing it all scared him. Yet he tried to shake off the worry, convincing himself that perhaps the manager was right. But deep down, his heart was restless. It was on a windy night when disaster struck. Flames erupted from one corner of the plaza, quickly spreading from shop to shop. By the time the fire service arrived, the inferno had consumed almost everything in his path. Arinze stood among the crowd, watching helplessly as his shop, his sweat, his sacrifice, his joy was swallowed by the fire. The goods, the chefs, even the signboard with his name, all reduced to ashes. Tears streamed down his face, but there was nothing he could do. The morning after the fire, the plaza stood like a graveyard of dreams. Smoke still curled from the ruins, and the smell of burnt plastic lingered in the air. Traders wailed, some fainted, others sat silently staring at what was left of their lives. Arinze walked through the debris and stopped at the blackened remains of his shop. His knees grew weak and he fell to the ground. For the second time in his life, Lagos had stripped him bare. But this time, he was no longer a boy. He was a man who had tasted success, and he knew one truth. Even from ashes, a man can rise again. Few days after the fire, Arinze was silent. Friends and fellow traders came to console him, but he barely spoke. He would sit by the ruins of the plaza, staring at the ashes as though searching for answers. But one morning, he stood up, dusted his trousers, and said to himself, I will not die here. If life wants to test me again, then I will fight again. His voice was firm, and though his heart still ached, a spark of determination returned to his eyes. When Arinze's friends heard he had lost everything, they rallied around him again. Some offered money, some offered space in their shops, while others offered encouragement. Their loyalty reminded him of the small group that once helped him after his boss betrayed him. Arinze, one of them, said, you rose from nothing before. You can do it again. Those words settled in his heart like medicine. He realized that though the fire had taken his goods, it had not taken his willpower or his good names. With no choice, Arinze returned to sharing a friend's shop. The space was small, just as it had been years ago, but he embraced it. He started again with a few phone chargers, memory cards, and rechargeable lamps. Humble goods for a man who once owned a plaza shop. Some customers pitied him when they saw how far he had fallen, but others admired him, saying, if this man can still stand after all this, then he is truly strong. Slowly, little by little, Arinze's business began to crawl back to life. The fire taught Arinze lessons he would never forget. He learned the importance of saving for emergencies, the value of insurance, and the need to prepare for the unexpected. But more than that, the fire taught him resilience. He realized that true strength was not in never falling, but in rising each time he fell. Each day he walked in that small corner of his friend's shop, he repeated to himself, I am not done. My story is not finished. Months after the fire, Arinze began to dream again, not just of owning a shop, but of building a business so strong that no disaster could destroy it. He planned to expand beyond Lagos, to open branches, and to employ others who had once suffered like him. He no longer saw his struggle as a curse. Instead, he saw it as preparation. Each betrayal, each failure, each fire was molding him into the man who would one day inspire others. And this time, he swore, no setback would ever keep him down for long. Arinze worked harder than ever, determined not to let the fire define him. With discipline and consistency, he built his stock little by little. Customers who had known him from the plaza sought him out, praising his honesty and encouraging him with their loyalty. Though his profit was not much at first, every little sale added up. He no longer rushed life. He understood that true success was not about how fast you rise, but how well you endure. 2 years after the fire, Arinze had saved enough to rent a modest shop again, not as big as the one in the plaza, but enough to stand on his own. This time, he invested wisely, ensuring that no single disaster could wipe out everything. His shop grew into a hub of trust. Customers knew that Arinze would never sell them fake products. Suppliers trusted him because he paid his debt promptly. Slowly, his name began to carry weight in the electronics market. As his business stabilized, Arinze began to notice young boys who reminded him of himself, poor, determined, and in need of a chance. Instead of turning them away, he took them under his care, teaching them not just trade, but patience, honesty, and resilience. Learn well, he often told them, because one day you will face your own fire. What will keep you standing is not the goods you sell, but the strength inside you. The boys admired him deeply, seeing in him more than a master, seeing in him a role model. Years later, Arinze returned to his village, no longer the poor boy who left with a torn bag, but a successful businessman who had survived betrayal and fire. His parents wept tears of joy as they welcomed him home. He built them a better house and provided for their comfort. But beyond material things, Arinze shared his story with the villagers. He told them how life had thrown him down again and again, yet each time he found the strength to rise. The people listened with open hearts, inspired by the boy who never gave up. Arinze's life became a living lesson. He understood now that wealth was not just measured in naira or property, but in resilience, integrity, and the ability to rise after every fall. Betrayal had not broken him, fire had not destroyed him. Instead, they had shaped him into a man of unshakable will. And so, whenever he spoke to young men and women chasing their dreams, he ended with these words: life will test you with hardship, betrayal, and loss. But remember this: falling is not the end. What matters is the courage to rise again. Success does not come to the fastest or the strongest, but to those who refuse to quit. If your hands are empty today, let your heart be full of hope. For even from ashes, greatness can rise.